What's going on, guys? Welcome to your 64th C++ tutorial, and in this tutorial I'm going to be beginning to talk about files. Now, we need to be able to work with files because files are what you use to save data on your computer. And you're saying, hold on, Bucky, I know what's used to save data. You can just store the data in variables or something like that. Well, we can't exactly do that for permanent data. For example, whenever we store data in a variable and we close out of the program, or maybe we want to shut down our computer, that data is going to get wiped out. Now, in order to save data permanently, what we need to do is we need to store it on a file on our computer. And what this does is whenever we're working with files, it stores it to your hard drive. It permanently etches it in there. So then whenever we shut down our computer, we can go ahead and pull it back up and everything is going to be working fine. For example, if you were playing a computer game or if you had to write an essay for school, you wouldn't want to just store all that information in a variable because then the user would have no way of saving that data. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with files, storing them on the computer's hard drives, and that gives our user a permanent solution to save data. Very useful, and well, you're probably going to be working with files in every single program you're using unless you're just making a cool animation or something. So let's go ahead, and the first thing I need to show you guys is we need to include an additional header file. So let's go ahead and copy this, save us a little bit of typing, and instead of IO stream, we're going to put fstream right here. Now this is the header file that we need for file input and output. Without this header file, we won't be able to work with files at all, basically. So that's your main file, I guess you could say. So let's go ahead, and now that we got everything included we need, again, this is to work with files. This is to input and output data, or basically how to add data to the file and read data from the file. So there you go, and let's go ahead and start coding now. So here is how you work with files in C++. The very first thing you need to do is you need to build an object. Since C++ can't work directly with the file itself, it needs to be able to go through objects just because, whoever made C++, that's how they made it. So the very first thing we do is we need to write OF stream, right like that. And this allows us, well, there are different types of file streams. Basically, this is how you create a file object. And right after this, you give your file object a name, any name you want. I'm just going to name mine Bucky's file. Now we have a file object, aka access to a file. So now the first thing that we want to do after this is we need to associate this object with a file itself, because if we're just working with this object, it's like, alright, you have like a billion files on your computer. How am I supposed to know what object this one, or excuse me, what file this object is supposed to, represent? Well, that's what we do in the next line of code. And in order to do that, we go ahead and type the name of our object and we open a file. And we just do that using the open function without the star right there and without this right there. We use the open function, and inside is a string. We pass in what file do we want to open. Now I'm going to go ahead and open tuna.txt, and you're saying, alright Bucky, I don't have a tuna text file on my website, or excuse me, sorry, I've been making web tutorials way too often. But if you're saying, alright Bucky, I don't have a tuna text file on my computer, so is it going to crash whenever it tries to open it? Well, no. Whenever you're working with files in C++ and it opens a file that doesn't exist, it's going to see that it doesn't exist and it's going to automatically create one for you. For example, my file is going to get created right here. Now, as you can see in this directory, there is no tuna text file. So whenever I try to open it, it's going to look for a tuna text file and it's going to say doesn't exist. I'll create one for you. So it's going to get created automatically, and it's pretty cool because it saves us, a line of code from having to create it. So basically what we're going to be doing so far is creating a file object. That way we have access to some file. And in this line of code right here, we're going to say what file do we want to be associated with this object. Well, now tuna text file is associated with this Bucky's file object. So now basically any input and output that we make to this object is going to be input and outputted in this file. We just can't, input and output directly to the file because C++ won't let us. Basically, Bucky's file is the exact same thing as tuna text file from now on. So now we can go ahead and, output characters to that file or whatever we want to output. For example, you're saying, alright, how do you output to a file? What are you talking about? Well, just go ahead and instead of outputting things to your computer screen like we have before, we use that operator right there, those two little less than signs, and we just write some text like I love tuna and tuna loves me, and we won't end that line. Actually, go ahead and put a new line just like that. And now you're saying, alright, before I had C out right there and it outputted to my computer screen. Well, now I'm going to go ahead and have Bucky's file right there, and all this text is going to output to a text file instead of the computer screen. So nothing's going to show up on the computer screen. What this means, this little operator, is output this data to this location. So before we were outputting the data to the computer screen, and now we're just outputting it all to a file. Simple enough. I mean, the operator is pretty cool and it works in that way. So now, like I said, we basically associated a file with an object in these two lines, and now anytime we use this object name, it pretty much knows it represents this file. So it knows whenever we want to output this text, it's really outputting it to this tuna.txt file right here. So that's going to run perfectly, but at the end of all your programs, when you're done working the files, you always want to close that object. And what that does is any little memory or buffers or any resources that the computer was using when it was working with this file right here, it's going to close them out and it's going to free your computer's memory. So it's just good programming practice to do this. So let's go ahead and type our file object, Bucky's file, and just go ahead and type close with no parameters. So let's go ahead and run this program, and as you can see, nothing happens right here because we didn't output anything to the computer screen. But if we go ahead and take a look at that directory, we now have a tuna text document that got created. So if we go ahead and double click that, the content of this is I love tuna and tuna loves me. Pretty cool, huh? So as you can see, this would be useful whenever you're creating a computer game and you have a character with a bunch of statistics like health and happiness and hunger. They can go ahead and play the game for an hour, store all their data, shut off their computer, go to school, go to work, whatever, come back, and all their data is going to be right there for them. It's not a new computer game every single time you start, because that would be kind of a waste of time. So that is how files are useful in computer programming and how to work with a simple text file. So if you think you're done with files yet, you got a long ways to go. So in the next tutorial, we're going to be covering more about files, and trust me, there's a lot more information that we need to learn. But for now, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.